Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to our live chat on poisons. I'm Tina Mangos. I'm the the Injury Prevention Coordinator for Dunedin and Coastal Otago. And here with me today, I have got Adam Pomorolo from the Poison Centre. Adam, over to you.
Kia ora, Tina. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here to talk about this topic, and just maybe as a bit of further introduction about me. So I'm a medical specialist. I'm what you call a medical toxicologist, which is a physician that is specialized in the management of poisonings. And with that background, I hold the role of director at the National Poison Center. And so because of my background and where I work, unfortunately, I'm also on call today. And so just a quick warning that sometimes things can't wait when you're dealing with poisoning situations, and I may be asked for advice, but usually, fingers crossed, we can get through the next little bit without any interruptions.
Lovely. Yes, fingers crossed. Thank you, Adam. Okay, so today we're going to be discussing an understanding of what poisoning means, specifically broadening our understanding of all the things that it could be. We're also going to be looking at how you can keep potentially harmful chemicals out of the way in a range of situations and environments, and where you can get extra information and support if you're ever worried about something that your tamariki or pepe has come into contact with. So Adam, let's get started. Something we talked about when we were preparing for this chat was defining what poisoning actually means.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think if people ask themselves what they think a poisoning is, there'll be lots of responses that seem obvious, but then there's also some situations that might be less obvious, but that I would consider something that our service could help people with. So the way that I like to think about it is that a poisoning is when there's been harmful exposure to some sort of substance, right? And so harm, the things to unpack there are harm, and that's pretty straightforward. Harm is an injury of some sort, right? Whether that's a physical symptom or maybe increasing risk of some sort of long-term outcome or something like that. Those sorts of things could be considered harm. So that's anything from vomiting to having much more severe effects, right? Exposure is another important part of that definition. So what does it mean to be exposed, right? So we've come into contact, a person has come into contact with something, and that might be very commonly, especially when we're talking about our tamariki, which are about 45 to 50% of our patients that we hear about are the 1 and 2 year olds that are exploring their environment, finding something and putting it in their mouth, right? But even touching a substance could be an exposure. So you could be exposed to something that's just spilled on the skin or applied to the skin through breathing, through putting something in the mouth, and of course through swallowing. And so all of these different ways of being exposed are things that might lead to a poisoning if there's harm. And then the last piece that of this definition of harmful exposure to substances is, what do we mean by substance? And that's really any chemical substance, right? So it's super broad. And so I won't go into the technical definitions there, but it really is that broad. So if you've been exposed to something, whether it's a spill of a household cleaner on the skin, well, if that doesn't cause any harm, that's not a poisoning. But if it causes a burn to the skin, then I would consider that a poisoning, right? And that's the kind of situation that we can be helpful in, both defining and trying to understand risk when people have these potentially harmful exposures, or maybe are even already having symptoms. So that's what I would think of as a poisoning. It might be different from what other people think of.
Lovely. Well, thank you for that, Adam. Yes, our tiny humans learn by touching and tasting, exploring their world around them. So that's why this topic is so very important. So are there any sort of common examples that you can give of poisonings in that age group that you mentioned, in our preschoolers and under twos?
For sure. And I think that, like I said, it's probably about almost half of the contacts we get at the Poison Center are about this age group. And the scenarios most commonly would be what we call child exploratory kinds of exposures. And I say exposure rather than poisoning because most of the time that's what we're dealing with. So a child is playing, a child is unsupervised for even a short moment, right? It does not take long, as any parent will know. It does not take long for you to turn your attention away, and then suddenly everything's different, right? And so very common scenarios would just be things around the house, household products, whether that is a cleaning product or it is maybe a reed diffuser or it's the dishwash powder or a medicine, right? So that a medicine that's unsupervised, a child has accessed, and despite the child-resistant caps, they've gotten into it, and maybe they're found with a tablet in their mouth or around them, or there's a spill and it's down the front of their shirt, and you don't know how much they had. We deal with that every day, many times a day. So that's one scenario. And another scenario that we commonly encounter is maybe in our tamariki that are not feeling the best and are on medicines for whatever reason. And there's been some sort of mistake, usually with the dose. And so a common scenario for us is, little one's got cough and cold kind of, flu-like symptoms, and they're being treated with some paracetamol or Pamol. Mom gives a dose, and then dad gives a dose, not knowing mom had given a dose a short while before then, right? And so we will often get calls like that too, where there's been some sort of error with a medicine leading to more being given than what was anticipated. So those are very good scenarios.
Yes, even, those childhood medicines, as you said, they're for children, but right dose for the right child. And you made a really good point there too in referencing child-resistant caps on medicines. We need to highlight that doesn't mean that they're child-proof. And as you said, Murphy's Law, when a parent's back is turned, that could be when they get hold of things. So we often think about in the home keeping poisons out of the way of our tamariki. And we know that there are risks everywhere. So what advice would you give? What advice would you have for both, for the home and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think one helpful thing that anyone can do is think about their own home and literally do kind of an inventory, sort of going room to room and thinking about what's in this room that might be something that I wouldn't want my child to have unsupervised access to, right? And so, like I said, it's very broad, and it includes all types of cleaning products. And so if you walk into your garage or your garage, and the automotive products might be one that's quite obvious that people might think, oh, I don't want them getting into these automotive products. But thinking even about the kitchen and different cleaning products, which can be range from irritating to more potentially risky types of substances. So a room by room sort of inventory and thinking about what's in this room. Do we keep any medicines in this room? Where do we keep them? And really taking that stock take. That's a first step, because then it's easy to think, or once I know what the potential hazards might be, well, what can I do to make it less likely that the child, my tamariki, will get into it or have access to it? And so that could be, if they're very small, something as simple as getting it high up off the ground into a high shelf. Or if it's a medicine, making sure that it's medicines that are in a cabinet somewhere or a less obvious place, or even locking things, or there's different ways that you can think. But just having that thought, and anyone can do that in their place where they live, and room to room, thinking about what's here and how can I make it less likely for my tamariki to access it on their own, is a starting point.
That's lovely. Yes, I think any intervention, that makes it more difficult for children to access those harmful substances is going to be absolutely brilliant.
One point that if I might, Tina, sorry, it just that came to mind too, that is a common scenario that we hear about, believe it or not, is some kind of product that's not in its original container. whether it's a cleaning product. We hear stories about all kinds of things. So we know this happens all up and down the country, that there is something in a water bottle or some container that it shouldn't be in, even in the fridge. And so sometimes people get into the fridge, they take a drink of something, and it's like, oh yeah, someone else put this chemical in there, and it's in the, so keeping things in their original containers is another, and that goes to medicines or any products, is another just relatively common thing that we hear about that is very preventable.
Yes, that's brilliant. I've even seen it myself when I've visited homes that, yes, cleaners can still be put in soft drink bottles and other containers that aren't their own. Now, what about when whānau are out and about, or potentially when they're in other people's homes, Adam? On the farm, especially rural folk, do you have any advice, any tips for us in those areas?
Yeah, I think that the same general approach is the best approach. And so obviously, especially if it's an environment that the tamariki are spending any significant amount of time in, right? They're going to be around that area. So really thinking about that. So, but the threats will be potentially different, right? If you're in a farm environment and there's different products that are used for agricultural purposes, obviously that, whether it's a pesticide or some sort of herbicide, which is for, getting rid of weeds and things like that. There's lots of potentially different risks, but the principles are the same. It's what is here in the area where my tamariki are, and how can I make sure that there's less chance for them to get exposed to those things or get access to them in an unsupervised way. It's just that what's different about those different environments is that the actual products that are there will vary versus what's in most, an average person's kitchen. But the general principles are the same. It's thinking about what are the potential threats and trying to minimize the ways that they're accessed.
Yes, because our tamariki can roam a fair distance as well too, whether it's in a home that they're not familiar with, whether it's on the farm. Yeah, it's amazing how far they can get.
For sure. And we definitely hear about, contacts from people. They're over at Nan's house and there was a pill on the floor, right? What can you do about that? That's very tricky, but I think that, of course, because it's not your home, right? It's someone else's home. But just being aware of that and especially if it's a place, again, that you're going to spend a lot of time with your tamariki, talking to people in those environments so they can do that kind of thing would be very helpful. But, some things, of course, the things we hear about are accidents, and to some degree, not every accident is preventable, of course, but we try to minimize the chances of them happening.
That's right, yes. It is all about that minimisation. Our tiny humans are unfortunately bound to give their adults quite a few little heart attacks as time goes on. Yeah. It's all about them learning. So you mentioned too a couple of things there with things that young ones can find in, say, a grandparent's home if they're visiting an older person if they're visiting an older person. But also too, some things that are quite commonplace people forget about are handbags. And handbags, no matter what age the person who has them is, can have a variety of hazards in them. You mentioned medication. Yes, a lot of older people do have more medication or are more likely to have medication in their handbag. But also things like batteries, which is a huge one, isn't it? Hearing aid batteries, especially that older people might have in their handbags, which we refer to as a seek medical attention now type of harm. So because it is so urgent and the impact that it can have on our tiny humans if they happen to swallow a button battery or a small battery. But also in handbags, there are a variety of things that can be harmful. Sharp instruments, medicines, cosmetics is another one. And unfortunately, some of those cheaper cosmetics that we can pick up from the bargain stores these days. Everybody likes a bargain, but some of those can be potentially harmful to young people as well too. Perfumes, those sorts of things. Yeah, quite a variety of hazards in a handbag to a little person as well too, aren't there?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tina. And that's one of those ideas of like, what is in this room? What is in my handbag? And another environment to think about is the car. We get calls from people where the kids have found something in the car and ingested that. And so the other thing that's really important about all these things, you mentioned all those different sorts of products, right? And knowing to the extent that it's possible, one of the very key pieces of information we try to collect when we're talking with people is, do you know the specific product, right? Because the specific product can be very different as far as what the ingredients in it are. You mentioned perfumes. Perfumes have a wide range of different compounds in them, but usually the main hazard with most perfumes, the main risk chemical we're most worried about is simple alcohol, or ethanol is the chemical name for what most people would refer to as alcohol. And lots of products, hand sanitizers are primarily made of ethanol or alcohol. And so if a young child were to drink even a 15 ml bottle of a hand sanitizer, that could be a pretty significant event for that child as far as the amount of alcohol that could get into their little body. And so knowing exactly what we're dealing with is very helpful, because the risks are always specific to the substance and the amount as part of when we're doing our assessment. And so it is hard to talk about very specific things in a general sense, because it's all very dependent upon what the thing is we're talking about. And those handbags are a great example of the variety of risks that might be out there, actually.
I love your reference to the hand sanitizer, Adam, because that's one of our in our modern times, that's a new one perhaps that has come onto the scene as well too. And I guess some people might not realise the high alcohol content in those. But that's great. So you would recommend that if somebody does ring the poison centre for advice on something they think their tiny human has ingested, to actually have that substance on hand so that they can give those specifics. Perhaps even read a label on the back of a container to see what the ingredients are in that particular product, so that the poison centre can give the best advice possible.
Absolutely. And we do try, we make a lot of effort in our team to try to categorize and know what's in things. But of course, manufacturers might change what's in a product. And so that's why nothing's better than the suspect bottle, right? There's nothing, and unfortunately, not everything is always labeled very well. But to the extent that we can, that always helps us do a better job with our assessment. And when it comes to medications, being very specific about the strength, the milligram strength, the name of the product, because even medicines that have the same name can have differences as far as how quickly they're absorbed in the body, and that can make a big difference to the type of advice that people are given as well.
So we've talked about medicines a fair bit. Is there any other advice you would give specifically around medications in relation to our tamariki?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, there's a wide range of risks, right? So, and being aware that for a lot of medicines, the most common scenario we hear about is probably a tablet or two are missing, right? And a lot of times, of course, the risk is entirely dependent on what the medicine is. And there are some things that pose quite a bit of risk, even with as little as 1 or 2 tablets. And so there's no message, that it can be applied to everything, because it is depending upon, so knowing what the medicines are. And if you don't know, if it's, sometimes people go into a new environment and there's a tablet, we don't know what it is, right? We'll do the best we can. We can always help with advice, but but being aware of what's around, keeping medicines in their containers. And medicines come in a wide variety of things, but a lot of times things that are dispensed from pharmacies, if it's not dispensed already in a blister pack, right, as a daily dosing kind of thing, it's dispensed with simple twist offs oftentimes. And so taking an inventory, do you have things in your home that are in simple twist offs that they're not even really child resistant packaging, and thinking about that and making sure that if you have things like that, that it is up, away, out of sight, in a physical location that is not going to be accessible to
Yes.
your little ones.
Up high in a cupboard is, or a higher cupboard is very good advice on that. And yes, those ones that could be in just a simple screw top might include, I guess, some things that people wouldn't automatically consider to be medicines, those things like vitamin supplements and those types of things that many people have in their home, I guess, as well too. Those are some of the ones that might be in a regular twist top, or a child resistant top on them as well too, or a child resistant cap. In relation to those two, we discussed in our planning that it's good advice just to highlight not to refer to any medications, be it pills or vitamins or anything like that, as lollies. It has happened in the past that grown-ups have referred to taking vitamins or taking medicine as that's mummy or daddy or grandma's lollies, and that can make it a little bit more attractive to children if they have had sweets. And yes, our children can't necessarily, especially our tiny humans, can't necessarily tell the difference between sweet and sour, or bitter substances as well too when they take them. Yeah,
that's a great point, because particularly when it comes to vitamins and vitamins that are kind of branded and intended for child use, we often get calls about, my child just had 40 or 50 of these. And maybe part of that is they think they are lollies, right? And so so I think that's a great message to give parents, and not that we don't use them, but don't making sure not to avoid using that terms like that to make them more attractive to the tamariki is a good idea.
Yeah, calling them exactly what they are. And one other thing we talked about too was in our planning. I mean, we all, with all the illnesses, especially those over the winter period, will have had lots of families with little ones that have been on medicine, and you might be giving them some Pamel, for example, in the middle of the night, or be giving them regular doses of prescribed medication. And even though it is for them, a bit of planning is always a good idea in that. We've all been there as tired parents taking care of sick children. It's a bit of a drain on the adults themselves too, isn't it? So in the middle of the night, just making sure they do put those medicines up high and away, where the children can't get them, rather than just leaving it, say, on a coffee table or a counter.
Yeah, and if something undesirable does happen, right? Knowing that you can reach out to our team, that we're always there 24/7 to give advice. Knowing, especially when it comes to things that are swallowed or ingested, right? Of course, the natural response of any parent is most likely going to be significant worry about that. But the good news is that very, very, very rarely is there something that's truly emergent that's going to happen in the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? Things that are swallowed take time to get into the body and into the bloodstream. And so there's plenty of time to call and talk to us and get some advice. And so one of the general pieces of advice that I can give is that we never recommend trying to make a child vomit after they've had something. So if a parent,
Very good
sometimes gives,
advice.
they gave an extra dose of the Pamol, I'll make them vomit it back up. No, please don't do that. It's unnecessary. And so even in things that are high risk, we don't recommend trying to make someone vomit for many reasons. But the message there is simply that it's please don't do it. It's only more harmful than beneficial. And so there are other things. Reaching out for help is really the things to do.
Yeah, because yes, in some cases too, if it is something that's very caustic, making that child vomit or throw it back up could cause even more damage, couldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the same instance, in that, would you give the same advice for not giving children any other substances to try and counteract what they've taken, not giving them milk or anything else like that? Would
Yeah,
that be?
not without a prior discussion, right? So in very rare situations, there might be with a specific kind of substance, something where we might recommend something like that, right? But that's only after we've kind of had a sense of what's happened, what's the best we know about the exposure substances. So then we can give advice about that. And certainly if a vomit does happen, right, let that happen, support the kid, but we don't make that happen.
Great advice there, Adam. Thank you so much for that. And as you said, yes, prevention is much better than cure, especially those medicines that are prescribed to the children themselves, keeping it out of access. Um, so it is an unfortunate incident, I guess, that tamariki are exposed to something harmful. So what's the first thing that you recommend that parents should do if they suspect that a child has taken something harmful?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to do is to try and take a breath and think clearly and gather whatever might be involved, and try to determine, one, that there's not anything else involved, two, that the child's not going to have more of it, right? But then, getting in touch with our service is usually sort of the easiest first thing to do. And again, these are situations where, you know, things there might be a reason to seek further medical care, but we have time to make that assessment, right? It's not the case that 111 needs to be called as soon as something's happened. 111 is there for people in, with real emergency situations and other things, right? And sometimes it might be appropriate, depending upon the context. We might even refer somebody to say, okay, maybe 111 is best for your situation. But generally, right, there in the vast majority of situations and things we hear about, there's plenty of time to call us, and we're pretty fortunate. We're pretty responsive as a service. It's not like some other call centers where you have to wait quite a long time to get in touch with someone. We're usually pretty responsive within several minutes. Is generally our kind of extent. So,
and I think it is wonderful too that the Poison Centre helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, isn't it? And it's a free phone 0800 number that I believe has been included in a link for this live chat as well too. And a good bit of advice is to actually have that Poison Centre number actually saved onto your mobile phone as a parent or caregiver, so that you have it there when you need it, isn't it, Adam?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great tip. And our number is we're like I like to think of our service as a just-in-time service, right? So people don't need us until they need us. And then helpfully our number can be on a lot of packaging, right? You might see our phone number the next time you're in the supermarket or in the pharmacy. If you look at a lot of packaging on the back, you'll find that our phone number will be listed there. It's not universal, but it's on quite a few things. It's on a lot of medicines information sheets as well. And so it's great that there are multiple sources. If people start to go online and look up, what do I do for a poisoning, which is very common in today's world, a lot of times our number will pop up there. So there's lots of different ways people might find their way to us. But I think, having that awareness, having it sort of in your mind, being aware now, hopefully through this webinar, it might save that time when you're like, where do I find this information?
That's lovely. And you can offer reassurance too when it's something that's not as serious. Look, thank you very much, Adam, for being involved with us today and giving us this live chat. Hopefully, well, I know that there will be a lot of really good information in there that families can take away. So, again, thank you very, very much for being involved in our live chat.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tina, for your time and for having me.
No worries. Thank you.